What if the Red Dragon had spread its wings across every continent? What if the Great Wall didn't just defend China, but marked the starting point of a global empire? History remembers the rise of Western powers, Spain, Britain, Portugal, who carved their dominance across the oceans. But centuries before them, China already had the ships, the manpower, the technology, and the ambition to rule the waves. Under the command of Admiral Zheng He, the Ming dynasty built the largest fleet the world had ever seen. Ships so massive they dwarfed anything Europe could imagine. And yet, instead of world domination, this superpower turned inward, closing its doors for centuries. In this video, we ask the ultimate question: what if China had actually conquered the world? How different would our nations, cultures, and futures be? Let's journey back in time and explore the empire that could have changed history forever. China's power at the dawn of the 15th century. To understand what could have been, we must first examine what already was. By the early 1400s, China stood as the Middle Kingdom, the heart of civilization, while much of the rest of the world lagged behind. Europe, for example, was still limping out of the devastation of the Black Death, which had wiped out nearly half its population. Its kingdoms were divided, its cities fragile, and its technology far behind. China, on the other hand, was unified under the mighty Ming dynasty, a centralized empire that could command the labor of millions with a single decree. Its population exceeded 100 million people, a staggering figure at the time, larger than all of Europe combined. This enormous manpower gave China unmatched economic and military potential. Vast irrigation systems supported agriculture, thriving markets connected cities, and the imperial court controlled every aspect of governance with bureaucratic precision. More importantly, China was already a technological powerhouse. It had given the world inventions that would later reshape history. Gunpowder, which transformed warfare, the compass, which guided sailors across open seas, paper and printing, which revolutionized knowledge, and advanced shipbuilding techniques that made their naval vessels unmatched in size and strength. Luxuries like porcelain, silk, and tea flowed from Chinese workshops into eager foreign markets, proving China's role as the economic center of the medieval world. But technology and resources alone don't make an empire expand. What truly set this period apart was leadership. At the helm of this rising maritime vision stood Admiral Zheng He, a man whose life was as dramatic as the voyages he commanded. Originally a captive child, castrated and forced into service as a eunuch, Zheng He rose through loyalty, skill, and charisma to become one of the Ming Emperor's most trusted commanders. In him, the dynasty saw not just a loyal servant, but a man capable of carrying the weight of an empire's ambition. Zheng He was tasked with a mission unlike any before: to take China's power to the seas, to announce the Middle Kingdom's dominance to the farthest corners of the known world, and to remind foreign rulers that China was not merely a nation, it was the center of civilization itself. With this order, the stage was set for one of the greatest what-if moments in world history: the treasure fleet, a navy unlike any other. Now picture this: an armada of over 300 ships, some so vast they seemed to defy imagination. These were not ordinary vessels, they were the legendary treasure ships of the Ming dynasty. Each one was a floating fortress of wood and silk, some stretching longer than football fields and rising as tall as modern skyscrapers. They carried 9 massive masts with crimson sails that billowed like the wings of dragons, and dragon eyes painted on their bows to symbolize vision and power. Archaeological evidence suggests these ships could reach up to 140 meters long and 50 meters wide, rivaling the size of a World War II aircraft carrier, centuries before such steel leviathans existed. For comparison, Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria, was barely 20 meters long. Zheng He's flagships made European vessels look like toys bobbing in the ocean. But the fleet wasn't just about size, it was about scale and organization. Alongside the massive treasure ships were smaller support vessels, supply ships carrying food, water, and even live animals, warships bristling with cannons, and transport ships holding cavalry horses and troops. Together, this naval force formed a self-sustaining floating city that could travel for months across the oceans. The manpower behind this colossus was staggering. Nearly 28,000 men sailed on the first voyage alone, more than the combined fleets of all of Europe at that time. This wasn't just a navy, it was a statement of power, prestige, and capability. Each man had a role: sailors to manage the rigging, soldiers to protect the fleet, translators to communicate with foreign rulers, merchants to negotiate deals, and even doctors, scholars, and diplomats. By 1405, when Zheng He launched the first expedition, China wasn't merely exploring, it was projecting dominance. When such a fleet appeared on the horizon of a foreign port, the message was clear: resistance was futile. One historian compared the Ming strategy to a mafia-like operation. They arrived with overwhelming force, offered trade and protection, but made it clear that failure to comply could bring swift consequences. Tribute wasn't optional, it was demanded as proof of respect to the Son of Heaven. And yet here lies the key difference between China's naval expeditions and the European colonial powers that would come later. While Spain and Portugal would conquer territories, enslave populations, and build empires through bloodshed, Zheng He did not seek to annex foreign lands outright. Instead, his goal was to extend influence through awe and prestige. He showed the world China's might, established trade routes, and ensured loyalty through fear and respect, not permanent conquest. Foreign rulers were not turned into subjects, but into tributary allies, tied into China's orbit through diplomacy, backed by overwhelming naval force. This approach created a vast network of relationships across Asia and beyond, alliances cemented not by occupation, but by recognition of China's supremacy. It was, in many ways, a softer empire, one ruled by reputation and grandeur rather than chains and swords. The reach of Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He led 7 voyages that took him farther than any Chinese admiral before or after. His fleet sailed across Southeast Asia, reached India, touched the Arabian Peninsula, and even arrived at the coasts of East Africa. In Malacca, he established Chinese recognition of the local kingdom, deterring rivals. In Sri Lanka, he left behind a trilingual stone tablet celebrating peace among religions. In Africa, the Chinese received giraffes and exotic animals as tribute, symbols of their vast reach. Now here's the crucial question. With such a fleet, why stop there? Why not push onward to Europe, to the Americas, to the Pacific Islands? China had the capability to chart and colonize lands long before Columbus or Vasco da Gama. Had Zheng He turned west toward the Atlantic, history's map of colonization could look entirely different. What if China had expanded further? Let's imagine for a moment that China hadn't stopped with Southeast Asia, India, and the coast of Africa. What if the Ming dynasty had pressed onward with its colossal treasure fleets, planting flags and colonies across distant lands? The ripple effects would have been extraordinary, shaping every corner of our modern world. Had China dominated global exploration, Mandarin could have become the universal language centuries before English ever took root as a global standard. Instead of Shakespeare, Newton, or the English Bible shaping world thought, it might have been Chinese classics like the Analects of Confucius or The Art of War. Our calendars could have revolved around the lunar cycle, and Lunar New Year, not Christmas, might have been the biggest annual celebration worldwide. The written word could have been defined by Chinese characters instead of alphabets, creating an entirely different foundation for global communication and literacy. China had already pioneered groundbreaking technologies long before Europe caught up: gunpowder, paper, compasses, advanced shipbuilding, and printing. If a global Chinese empire had spread these innovations aggressively, the world might have entered an industrial age hundreds of years earlier. Imagine steam engines, factories, and mechanical tools appearing in the 1400s instead of the 1700s. Entire empires could have been transformed by early mechanization, and modern science, medicine, and even space exploration might have advanced centuries ahead of schedule. Humanity might already be living on Mars today if this acceleration had occurred. Under Chinese dominance, the famed Silk Road would have been overshadowed by a far larger system. Let's call it the Dragon Route. With treasure fleets sailing to every corner of the globe, trade would have flowed under Chinese oversight. Tea, porcelain, silk, jade, and lacquerware might have become the world's defining commodities, shaping global art, fashion, and culture. European goods, wool, glass, and wine might have been seen as exotic novelties in a Chinese-led world order. The very concept of globalization would have been born centuries earlier, under Beijing's banner. Perhaps the most radical shift would have been political. Instead of European monarchies and later democratic republics dominating the world stage, China's Confucian model of order, hierarchy, and bureaucracy could have set the global standard. Leaders might have been chosen not through hereditary kingship or elections, but through rigorous examinations and administrative merit, just as imperial China selected its officials. This could have created a world more centralized and disciplined, where collective stability outweighed individual freedom. Concepts like Western liberal democracy or capitalism might never have taken root at all. In short, the West might never have dominated. The age of exploration could easily have become the age of China. From culture to commerce, politics to philosophy, the world we know today would look profoundly different, perhaps more unified, perhaps more controlled, but certainly reshaped under the Red Dragon's wings. Why didn't it happen? But reality tells another story. Despite its unmatched power, China chose not to pursue conquest. Why? The reasons were deeply political. Emperor Yongle, who commissioned Zheng He's voyages, died in 1424. His successors were far less interested in overseas adventure. They considered the treasure fleets expensive luxuries that drained the imperial treasury. After all, why invest in distant lands when China already had everything it needed within its own borders? By the 1470s, records of the treasure fleet were deliberately destroyed. Shipbuilding was restricted and China turned inward, focusing on defending itself rather than projecting power. For centuries afterward, it closed its doors to the outside world, leaving the path wide open for Europe. Columbus, Magellan, Vasco da Gama all carved empires while China stayed home. The world that could have been. Had China continued its expansion, the very structure of our modern world might have been unrecognizable. The Americas could have been colonies of Beijing instead of Madrid. Africa might have traded under Chinese ports rather than European forts. The British Empire might never have risen at all. Instead of the US dollar, the yuan, or its ancient equivalent, could have become the world's reserve currency. Even more fascinating, imagine if Chinese philosophy, art, and political traditions shaped global values. Confucian ethics, order, respect, hierarchy might have been the dominant ideology rather than Western ideas of liberty, capitalism, and democracy. Would our world be more disciplined, less individualistic, or perhaps more centralized under one global order? This isn't just speculation. History shows how close it came. China had the power, the ships, and the leadership. What it lacked was the political will. Echoes in the modern world. Today, many argue that China is once again approaching that turning point. Just as Zheng He once projected Chinese power through his treasure fleet, modern China projects influence through trade, infrastructure, and global investment. Projects like the Belt and Road Initiative have been compared to a modern treasure fleet, linking Asia, Africa, and Europe under Beijing's economic orbit. So maybe the question isn't just what if China conquered the world centuries ago, but also what if it's happening now in a new way? The difference is that conquest today doesn't come with cannons and ships, but with technology, trade, and diplomacy. History is filled with crossroads, and one of the greatest was China's decision to close its doors in the 15th century. Had the Ming dynasty continued its naval expansion, the entire world order could have been rewritten. English might not be the global language, Western powers might never have risen, and our modern map could look entirely different. But history teaches us this. Power doesn't only come from armies, it comes from choices. China chose isolation, and the West filled the vacuum. Today, as China rises again, many wonder if the world is witnessing a second chance at global dominance. So what do you think? Would a Chinese-led world have been better or far more controlled? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.